So we want to talk about, loyalty is a very common use case when we start looking at blockchain applications, particularly on permissioned private ledgers like Fabric. There's a lot of assumptions, if you haven't worked in the loyalty industry, that people make simply about tracking simply the transaction in a dollar amount or what the point or star or mile is that's being recorded to a member account. Loyalty is actually a far more significant and multidimensional application area beyond just simply the transacting of a particular award, mile, star, or point. By way of background, some domain expertise in this area. Prior to joining Loyyal at the beginning of this year, I've been on the board there for a while, but I'm responsible partly for the merger of Marriott Rewards and Starwood Preferred Guest. I was running loyalty at Marriott for a number of years. Came in there to do transformation. We decided the easiest way to do transformation was simply buy Starwood. Yes, the program has had, that merger's had some hiccups, but there's a lot of lessons learned from how to merge that. I come from a technology industry background, having bought and ran Atari for a number of years, ran Yahoo Games, worked at Microsoft. Parts of Windows are my fault. And so come from a tech industry background, which is a fun domain to bring together with loyalty. When we talk about loyalty at large, it's important to remember that fundamentally it is the intersection of economics and behavioral psychology. We think about loyalty programs, particularly from a technology perspective, again, about that ledger, about that database, about that loyalty management platform. What it really fundamentally amounts to, though, is, again, you're doing this to modify an individual member or consumer's behavior. And that behavior modification will not only be, and we're already starting to see this with AI agents, it's not only on the part of the behavior of an individual consumer, but it will be on the part of other systems. And we're starting to see areas in this domain with some of the autonomous car companies that we've been in discussions with around how will you provide an incentive to an agent that is a non-human agent acting on behalf, perhaps, of a human agent. But that behavioral psychology, while you might not have behavior in the traditional sense of a non-human agent, there still is a behavior you're trying to incentivize and provide an attachment of value to it. Tracking of those different behaviors and the discretionary differences in value is what a chain is inherently beautifully designed to do. To understand the scale of this domain and the challenge here, loyalty is estimated by certain analysts, and I think the number is actually probably a little bit bigger than this. On a global basis, the amount of value locked up in member wallets, whether that's a Rakuten loyalty program in Japan, or that is Lufthansa Miles and More, or it is Marriott Rewards, over $5 trillion is estimated to be locked up in member wallets in currency globally. Now, when I say locked up, many members, there's a certain amount of breakage when we think about these programs. From an accounting standpoint, how much of that funds will never be redeemed on the part of a member who just accumulated a few thousand points or miles but didn't have enough to redeem for something of value. But a lot of programs, most programs don't want to see breakage. And you want to see areas where the member is actually utilizing that currency and engaging with the program, because if there is breakage or there are residual values sitting there in a member wallet, that means your program is in some extent failing. And Jackie, I want to turn to you with this question around this point. How do, from a Star Alliance perspective, you have a purview over all the different airline programs from the 28 member airlines in the Alliance. How do the airlines look at breakage versus utilization or redemption from the member base?
I think you raised a good point. Well, you have to find a balance as the FFP, as the frequent flyer program, and the airline, because obviously you've got this liability to your books. However, once the demands of the customer expire, obviously you didn't have to spend any amount of costs for an airline ticket or for any third-party supplier. So practically the cost just disappeared and you had some kind of profit to your company. So practically breakage is not always a bad thing. However, this is not the reason why you have a loyalty program, and that's not how you keep your customers loyal to your company. So obviously redemption opportunities are so valuable. I think there's a rough percentage of, 10-15% of customers who never redeem their miles, and that's not because they don't want to. Probably they want to, but it's just too complicated, too complex to find ways to redeem them. And actually, you see, whenever a customer redeems miles for any kind of product, the value increases drastically. So the money that the customers spend, you can see an upturn immediately whenever they have a positive experience with the product. So I think there are many ways that airlines or any other company that deals with loyalty programs can enhance their redemption proposition.
So let me follow up with a question on what you just said. Is it then a function of that if a member redeems, they actually become more valuable, even though they've now taken something of value out of the economy of an airline, let's say, but the fact that they've redeemed something, their propensity for future spending is demonstrably higher?
Well, you had a positive experience as a customer, and obviously the next step is, I want to have this positive feeling again, so you go and earn miles, points, whatever again. However, I think you get to it later. Redeeming things and miles, points, however you call them, is not the only thing how to keep customers loyal, but I think you'll get to this.
I know that within the Marriott program, one of the things that we looked at as a risk, and again, when we're thinking about chain applications and how those will manage or monitor or track loyalty behaviors, not just not just shifts in value from one ledger to the next. I lived in fear of a member redeeming a certain percentage of their points from Marriott Rewards, because I knew that the moment they emptied their balance in my program, to a certain extent, a frequent traveler, as we know, has loyalty in multiple hotel chains on the hospitality side. So if you're carrying a Marriott Rewards card, there's a high propensity you were carrying a Starwood card, you're also carrying a Hilton Rewards or Hilton Honors card or a IHG card, etc. And I knew if you redeemed a whole bunch of your points for that wonderful getaway weekend, the likelihood that I was gonna get your next stay diminished, because you were gonna go pick up and use that somewhere else. You were gonna now go earn more on Hilton or go earn more on another hotel chain. In a consortium model like Star Alliance, does that matter? Because if I use all my points at Lufthansa, well, as long as I'm still flying other Star Alliance airlines, it's important, I'm sure, to Lufthansa, but is it, from an alliance standpoint, is it really about keeping them in the alliance, or are you trying to drive business on behalf of a particular airline?
Yeah, well, that's the nature of our business. We are an alliance. We have 28 airlines and 21 frequent flyer programs. So it means we are there to work together. We want to have synergies. We want to drive additional revenue. We want to have additional redemption capabilities that we enable for our customers across 28 airlines. However, in the end, we're competitors. Not we, the airlines are competitors. So we somehow need to find a balance here as well. And you're fully right. Once a member has fully cleared their balance, and I'm at zero, why would I start again collecting all my miles? So practically that's an issue that we're facing when we say we want to enable customers to redeem for practically everything. We want to make miles a currency that practically enables customers to pay with their miles for everything, and it's so easy. That means you don't even need to collect, 7,000, 20,000 miles until you can earn something. You can redeem them for a benefit, but you can do it all the time when you go, to the pharmacy. You can buy something with your miles at the pharmacy and have your miles balanced to zero. So this is like a balance where we have to be very careful. Do we lose a customer at this point in time by enabling them to redeem and fully clear their account balances?
Right. I think it's that exchange or that redemption component is important. I think that one of the fallacies that has perpetuated within the technology community, particularly around blockchain technologies, is that I'm always amused that about about every 90 days, there's some press release from some startup that is going to issue the Uber cryptocurrency that will allow consumers to unanimously or ubiquitously exchange their currency from any loyalty program to some other loyalty program, as long as everybody adopts that crypto. I always am amused when I see those announcements, because all it means is that the person or the entrepreneur announcing that has never actually worked for a brand or has never actually talked to a brand, because to your point, even though you're all part of all the 28 member are part of the same alliance, there is an interchange there. Any member of Star Alliance doesn't want ubiquitous transfer for somebody from SkyTeam or One World or one of the other alliances. That the loyalty programs don't want ubiquitous transfer. They want liquidity within their ecosystem, but not ubiquitous transfer across anything and everything. Some of what you were talking about always appeals to this quote that I have to give credit to our friends at American Express on this one, that I always loved this, that insane imbalance that we have in business between acquiring a new customer but not necessarily paying adequate attention to retention of that customer. And loyalty programs are kind of a stopgap measure in many respects to make up for that retention problem. The depth of that is often overlooked, though. Again, managing a program at Marriott where 110 million active members worldwide, a 92-year-old hotel company. As I often used to argue with some of our other senior executives, Marriott is a software company that thinks it's a hotel company. Because once the neon sign is hung on the building, everything that it delivers is through software, whether it's right down to the housekeeping schedule, who cleans which room that day. And in a world of that nature, looking at loyalty tends to become almost an accounting function or a marketing function versus really understanding how do you ingrain and become part of that member's lifestyle. Which feeds into my favorite Maya Angelou quote of ever, which again really I think defines loyalty as what we're trying to accomplish. And the interesting dynamic of why we wanted this session at all is how do you connect something that is inherently feeling-based, loyalty to a brand? Classic American example is, there's very few brands like Apple where people will camp out and wait for your product because they just want the image of having your product. Very few brands like Harley Davidson where people will go and get it tattooed on their skin. That is a feeling, that is not a transaction. So how do we use technologies like Fabric or Hyperledger, other frameworks within Hyperledger to connect those dots? How do we connect the dots from an identity management system from Indy to a loyalty-based model built on Fabric and be able to build out that picture of what the feeling looks like transactionally versus just simply a ledger of accounting? So again, in summary, loyalty is actually greater than rewards. It's not simply these balances of points, even though, and the greatest challenge that I can say from my experience, and I'm interested in yours on this as well, Jackie, most loyalty management systems, they've been around for decades. The Marriott software, quick anecdote, I joined Marriott Rewards when it was back when it was called, not honored guest, I was honored guest. And that was my first business trip out of college in 1984. And you can imagine the shock when I took over the program in early 2014 that we were running the same COBO architecture from 1984. I used to threaten that if you ever saw me walk in with a backpack, run for a safe distance because going down to the basement and taking out the mainframe. It was impossible to deal with this architecture that is 40-year-old software because most of those legacy management systems are simply fundamentally a database with a name and a balance. There's no other way to represent everything that built up that balance and what that consumer sees. That was something I saw in the hospitality industry. When you look across the different 28 member airlines of Star Alliance, I'm sure there's some more sophisticated than others, but is there still that challenge of what the legacy systems can and cannot represent?
I might say it's even worse, because I think many of you remember the paper tickets that you had when flying on any airline. Let's say in recent years. Now we have, a couple of years later, we have boarding passes, we have mobile apps, we don't use any papers practically to do anything. But this only reflects on the customer side. However, what happens in the back-end system, it's still, let's call them legacy systems. They're super old. You couldn't imagine what they look like. So practically, there's not much that you can do. And we just talked before, and when I said, yes, we are considering blockchain for many of our new projects where we see huge problems, obviously, and this might finally solve these things that we're seeing. However, the current projects that we're dealing with, where we think they're super innovative, is exchanging information in real time between airlines. Simple information, such as customer data, status of a customer between the airlines. This is very basic. This should be carriers and airlines should have been able to do this like 15, 20 years ago via the internet. And now we're talking blockchain, which is way ahead. However, I hope that mostly we see ourselves as a consultancy at Star Alliance because there's not much else that we do. We're consulting our 28 airlines, getting inspired by Loyyal, for example, using blockchain for the problems that we're facing, that all our airlines are facing, and trying to find a solution that fits all and that benefits all at the same time. So I think working even within the airline, facing all those challenges every single day, blockchain is even further away, even though we know that many of our airlines are investigating this solution for many of the challenges that we have.
Right, and explicitly not turning this session into any kind of commercial for what Loyyal is and what Loyyal does. I, as a traveler, was intrigued by some of our early discussions when we first met, because I've experienced personally the fact that, well, I know I can earn miles from any other Star Alliance airline, and I've banked a bunch of them with United, which is one of my home programs. I have to say one of, for the amount of travel I get to do. But yet, if I want to get a ticket on any other Star Alliance airline, more often than not, it means at least half an hour on the phone with a customer service agent to try to arrange that redemption ticket. And that would seem to be a hindrance to the economy within the alliance.
That's one of the examples, because just to give you some background, you have the airline, but most of the times the frequent flyer program is a separate company. That means they're doing business together. It doesn't mean that we have to talk inter-alliance. It can be United talking to Mileage Plus as being the other program. So it means there are two different systems behind, at least two different systems behind it, plus the reservation system to issue the ticket. That means if you want to redeem your miles, you're talking to Mileage Plus, which is the frequent flyer program, but you want to buy a ticket on another company, which is United or any other Star Alliance carrier. That means we somehow needed to connect those systems. And this is actually state-of-the-art, which we just launched this year, that you can book your ticket online by redeeming miles. So it's practically the first step towards our final goal, using miles as a currency to pay for any product. And this was practically the first step, because before that you had to call the call center, who talked to another call center agent to redeem your miles manually from the system. So there was no real-time
redemption
connection.
within the airline industry. Most of us would think about it's let me redeem my miles for that free seat. Now we'll get to Q&A later on. Now we got such a nice small intimate group. I'm hoping to get some good feedback from everyone in the room. I know in my particular case, I amassed so many miles. It's not about having the miles for redemption. I'm redeeming miles. Unfortunately, I have a girlfriend who loves to travel, so those miles don't last in my account long. But I'm more interested in the access it buys me. I'm more interested in the fact that because I've attained a certain status tier, I'm allowed to board early. Because I've attained a certain status tier, United will meet me at the gate with a car to take me to my connecting flight. Those are things that don't show up as transactions in my monthly statement. But yet, one of the things I think that's really powerful about a chain environment, and again, the kind of systems we're trying to build out for Loyyal, is to extend those legacy loyalty management systems so that those individual events, you're not just tracking on the chain my behaviors as a consumer and my purchases, but you're also able to track every one of those behaviors or those exchange engagements. That the fact that I got a car from gate A at Terminal 1 to another gate and another terminal needs to be tracked somewhere, recorded somewhere, and it's getting lost in the traditional loyalty management systems. And I think that's where chain and particularly the way Fabric can be implemented with private channels holding metadata about the transaction itself, that starts to show some pretty interesting applications, because access is important.
Well, taking this example, one of the benefits is to have access to the lounge, probably. So if you just take this example and you're a Mileage Plus member and you visit the lounge in Frankfurt from Lufthansa, we are an alliance. That means we have contracts amongst each other. We trust each other a lot, because this is all about trust. United will pay Lufthansa that you visited the lounge. So Lufthansa wants money from United.
Correct.
But currently, this is all about trust. We can track nowhere that you actually, we know that you visited the lounge, because the Lufthansa agent...
I had to check in. I had to scan my boarding pass, or I had to show my membership card.
So Lufthansa agent said, check, he was in my lounge. But United was never so sure, because in the end, on a monthly bill, they see, okay, 1,000 passengers from United visited our lounge here in Frankfurt, so I send United a bill, and United trusts. So
but there's no tracking of who it was that visited.
So this would be one of the cases where, and I think this is the thing that currently always comes up when talking about blockchain, is trust with partners that you probably don't even know. So the benefit here is we know each other, but still there might be better ways to track and to find ways.
So reiterating that point, then it's not the tracking, the using of blockchain technology, and Fabric in particular, isn't just about the transactions, the dollar amounts, and the miles awarded. It's every moment of engagement with the member in the program. One of the things that I think that is really fascinating about loyalty, again, that we have to think around how do we start tracking these things on a chain differently than we may have in the past is around identity. I mentioned a little bit briefly ago, the line outside an Apple store the night before a new phone launch, or getting Harley tattoos. These are forms of identity that customers have taken on the identity. I know that, for example, when we were merging the Merit Rewards and the Starwood Preferred Guest program, I was burned in effigy on the front lawn, almost really, because the people were very concerned about losing their lifetime status. And the reality was that was a badge of honor for them. They had no way to really show that to anybody else, but they liked knowing and they liked having that as part of their identity, that they had achieved a lifetime status at a certain elite level with the programs. Interesting anecdote to that as well. Many of you may or may not know that Marriott International owns 30 different brands now, even after the Starwood acquisition, Ritz-Carlton being one of them. The Ritz-Carlton team, I love them, one of my favorite brands. I stayed at a lot of their hotels over the years, even before I joined Marriott, but they are a bunch of snobs, and God love them for it because it makes their customer service what it is. The challenge with Ritz-Carlton is they stood up their own program. There was a Ritz-Carlton Rewards program, pure white label version equated to the Merit Rewards program, aside from some differences in the benefits when you stayed at a Ritz-Carlton versus any other Marriott brand. And we had a tremendous sign-up rate for the Ritz-Carlton Rewards card. But like every modern loyalty program, we didn't bother issuing you a plastic card until you attained elite status, because you get so many millions of people joining these programs. So you hold no card in your wallet that shows you're a Ritz-Carlton member, and yet you joined that Ritz-Carlton program. And when you looked at the data of the Ritz-Carlton members, less than 30% of them ever stayed at a Ritz-Carlton hotel. So let me get this straight. You joined a program, you're never staying at their hotel, and you have nothing to show, no visible outward identity. It's not like you're going to walk into the courtyard and throw a black piece of plastic down on the counter and try to impress Peggy Sue behind the counter that you're a Ritz-Carlton member and hope to get some benefits out of it. People were joining that program, continue to do so, simply because of they see themselves as that kind of customer. I would have told you before I joined Marriott that I saw myself as a W customer. Even though if you looked at my profile from SPG, I stayed very little at W. From an expense standpoint, I work with a lot of startups, and you can't tell the guys who are eating top ramen that you're going to stay at the W while they're down the street at the Days Inn. So identity comes into play. In the airlines, other than that access and status, so there are other ways that identity gets manifested in the members. You have, of course, the elite tiers. But how do people identify or carry that identity around with them? Is that this is their airline, this is their brand that they identify with?
Well, practically, you've got the frequent flyer programs, and many people earn their miles, obviously, when flying on certain airlines, because they don't only want to have the miles, but they also want to make use of the benefits. Nonetheless, there are a bunch of non-air partners that are associated to it. You can earn your miles or more miles when you go to the next petrol station, when you stay at different hotels, when you go do online shopping. So practically earning miles, credit card earnings, for example, same thing. You might have one flight a year, however, you see yourself as a frequent traveler, even though you go by car or by train all the time. But you have a frequent flyer card and earn your miles, but still, right. you can earn your miles on many different ways through your whole everyday life thing.
Right.
So
that's actually one of the areas I think that's most opportunistic for technologies like blockchain to apply to loyalty, is that, again, if you think that most legacy systems today simply are nothing more than a database that says member name and member balance with no additional granularity other than that, I can go forensically back through and build up a profile what that member does or has done historically, but it's not traditionally done in a lot of systems. In a chain environment, by looking at a member's wallet, I can see that member A may have 100,000 miles and member B may have 100,000 miles, but there's a fundamental difference in the nature of in the value of that customer because of how they earned those miles. If they earned them mostly through a co-brand credit card spend, that may be of less value to me than the customer who earned them more through actual paid seats. And
although the customer might be of higher value because you have a very nice negotiation with a co-branded credit card. Yes. So you might want to encourage these customers to earn miles and they redeem tickets on your airline. So it really depends. You have to find a balance on so many facets.
Right. Talking about identity a little bit more, I've got this graphic up of a young Girl Scout with the sash. And for those of us that love data, the thing that is interesting here is not only does that SASH, and I've always tried to use this as an analogy when looking at loyalty models, because not only does the SASH represent expression of identity, these are the things that these are the things that interested me, but think about it a little deeply. It's a time series of data. I know what was more important to that person because of which badge they earned in which sequence. You go after the easy ones, or you go after the ones that are interesting to you first and foremost. And so when we look at achievements or awards in a loyalty program, what people pursue and the sequence in which they pursue them, I think is something that a chain can help elevate and make more and surface better. That knowing that a person is on a redemption stay is one good trigger point for when to treat them a different way. So,
may I just add?
Yes,
I
please.
think this will also add a lot of value to negotiations that you have with partners, because if you would say, based on a transaction, I see that my customer, usually the first thing that he does is booking the flight when going on a travel, because usually it's the most expensive part, and if you don't get there, you don't need a hotel. So practically, this is always the first step. So you can have negotiations with your hotel partners, for example, saying, well, we might have to have another look at our current negotiation rates. So I think that it's very valuable to see this information, because otherwise you have never the opportunity to have a look at those.
Now, one of the things I know that's important to Star Alliance is historically those rates of exchange between either multiple airlines in the consortium or between an airline and a hotel company or a rental car company, those are codified in a legal agreement. They're negotiated. The negotiation can take a long time. But do those change? Do those fluctuate over time, or is it renegotiated over a period?
They do change.
Mm-hmm.
It strongly depends on the partner. You've got 1-year negotiations up to 5-year negotiations. Nonetheless, I think it's very crucial when you consider not only the negotiation part, but also setting up the contracts. And we discuss a lot the smart contract solution. So I think it's very essential that you really got this one source of truth and you know what's going on, and it's just triggers the information instantly, instead of having all those rolling approaches with reporting, sending the reports to the different stakeholders, to the other partners, getting them approved, sending it back, sending a bill, getting the settlement done. So I think this whole process, until you really receive the money, sometimes takes up to 2 months until you really get the money on the account. However, I mean, airlines around the world are struggling. We all know that. And I think
margins are thin.
Margins are thin. And the more technologies we can have in order to increase or decrease the time until liquidity comes into the account, that's everything of those technologies are super valuable to the airline industry.
So if we were able to take those negotiated rates, say between an airline and a rental car provider, and codify that in a smart contract instead, is there may be the desire? How realistic is it then to start looking at the rate of exchange is at one value for a certain kind of behavior or a certain kind of customer, but it's at a different rate for a different kind of customer? Because I would think that being in a smart contract gives you the dynamic nature that you could then do those kind of things.
Yeah, certainly. You might, from your perspective as an airline, you might want to treat your customers better that have high credit card earnings, or fly a lot on your airline instead of flying or partner airlines more. So you might want to treat them better when they redeem their miles, for example. Or you might say, I want to treat customers with a better conversion rate when they book in low seasons, because that's when I have to fill up my planes. So I think these smart contracts are a very useful tool in order to refine negotiations and conversions as well.
And direct behavior.
Yeah.
Multiple currencies are something I think that gets lost a lot in loyalty models. Again, if you think about the legacy nature of the loyalty systems being simple name and balance, there isn't a lot of way to track the inherent differences. But yet, if you're all here in Basel, so I'm guessing many of you travel a lot. If you think about how most loyalty programs are architected, and we'll use an airline example, you took a paid seat. You took a fare, and you earn miles for that flight. Well, that, yes, you're given your miles as a percentage of value you paid for the ticket, but inherently in the airline, that has one margin for them because of the nature of the miles awarded. You were given some bonus miles because you're an elite status member. Well, those have a different underlying cost basis. Oh, and you use the co-brand credit card, as we've talked about, because those are negotiated with a third-party credit card provider. Those have a different underlying cost basis. And then, oh, wait, you happen to fly during a promotional period where you got some bonus points because you flew in this window. Those have another cost basis. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in a moment, but you start to understand the picture that all points are not equal. All points do have individual underlying value differences, and that can be something that the chain can track. You have achievements in the business today where customers, you may identify a particular segment, you target them with a promotion and say, if you fly a certain number of times or if you stay a certain number of times, you get these bonus points. And that's lost a lot. While it does affect the behavior, it's a very simplistic thing that doesn't take advantage of what the new technologies, such as putting things on blockchain, enable us to do. You can take in a blockchain model the same achievement model of identifying the segment, but now I can do the optimization of the targeting based on the aggregate data of the member's wallet. One example we've used a lot when we've talked about the use of Loyyal's technology to extend existing loyalty management platforms is that the behavior as represented by the aggregate number of transactions or set of transactions in that member wallet is now surfaced. So a marketing automation layer, Adobe Target, Adobe Audience, instead of trying to simply go on some predefined segmentation that member falls into, can literally look at that member's wallet and say, has this member taken this behavior or done this action? I'll use an example. For a brand, product discovery, product sampling, product trial is really, really important. You want your consumers to try new things, to see new offerings that you have. Marriott launched a new hotel brand just a handful of years ago called Moxie. Many of you may not even know about it. It's a small brand, only about 30 hotels worldwide, but lots of contracts to build new ones. You can imagine a scenario where it's in the Marriott's interest that if you're making a reservation and you're shopping for price for hotels in a particular town, and there's a Moxie there, and you've never stayed at a Moxie, I'm going to offer you some bonus points to go ahead and sample a brand you've never sampled before. And you could easily interchange that for the Bulgari brand or the Edition brand or any of these more smaller brands as part of that overall 30 brand family. But being able to know whether or not you ever had that stay today in the legacy systems is impossible. So looking at behaviors and trying to surface them up, I think it's something the chain affords us the ability to do real dynamically. Just as dynamically, you can generate different objectives and then say, well, in order to earn those bonus points, I need you to take this combinatorial set of behaviors or set of actions as a consumer. Very difficult to do because you can't track them across the different partners. I could say, I want you to fly a Star Alliance carrier at least twice, introduce us via your social network and postings to at least, make at least 5 social posts, refer us to 3 different members, and have 2 dining experiences at a partner restaurant. There's no way in a lot of the legacy systems today, almost impossible I would say in practical terms, to be able to know that those different behaviors occurred across those different domains. To have to wire up Facebook to Mileage Plus to know that I made 5 postings would be impossible, let alone multiply that across any number of additional social media.
And identify the customer.
And identify that same customer, right. So by tracking these individual engagements and behaviors on chain, they can be aggregated and surfaced and then turned into a different kind of achievement and turned into a different kind of award for that member. So again, it's really something fundamental that having that capability to tokenize every engagement and understand what those tokens represent in terms of a member aggregate set of behavior, I think is a transformative aspect for this technology. Liability management is, I'm an economics geek of sorts, and so liability management becomes an interesting area as well. We talked earlier about the $5.2 trillion locked up. Just coincidentally, the amount of the liability that Marriott holds is little over $5 billion themselves in the combined liability of points outstanding held by members across their programs. So if you think about, again, what I mentioned a moment ago, that the margins are different based on how you earned your points. The loyalty systems today, when you go to redeem those points or miles or stars, it's simply first in, first out. There's no way of knowing or attributing which points I'm going to burn as the program. Yet, What a chain affords us the ability to do now is revenue management of this multi-trillion-dollar liability. To be able to squeeze out, and we did some back-of-the-envelope calculations at Marriott, that to be able to squeeze out through some revenue management of the liability, we were looking at taking down anywhere from 30 to 70 million additional per year. Now, on a $5+ billion liability, that doesn't seem like a lot, but I can tell you from managing my department's budget, if I had an extra 70 million in my pocket every year, that gave us a lot of latitude to do some interesting things. So now, in a chain approach, I can look at any individual member wallet and see, again, that distribution of their points, the distribution of their value, and know how to redeem out of there. If they're having a really great quarter, I may choose to burn off the low margin points first. If we're having a particularly tight quarter, I may choose to burn off the higher margin points and change that liability picture. Another area that I think chain affords us the ability to do differently is distributing that liability in general. If you were to look at the fact, and again, going back to a hospitality business model, which is different than the airlines, because the airlines own the planes. Well, at least they lease them, but they're the airlines' planes. In the hospitality industry, the hotel management companies, be it Hilton, Hyatt, IHG, or Marriott, they don't own the hotels. Those are owned by real estate developers, and so they're managed by the management company on their behalf. But yet the management company takes on the liability of all those points that are awarded. When, if you were to actually read these 20-year management contracts, that liability is legally the responsibility of the gentleman or the company or the real estate investment trust who owns that building. And in most cases, most of those hotels, over 6,000 in the Marriott network, you have large swaths of hotels, multiple brands owned by individual development companies. And so you've got a management company at the headquarters level carrying this massive multi-billion-dollar liability when it really is the responsibility of all those individual hotels in the network. Then you get into the disparity. You've got a central business district hotel. For those of you that are familiar with North America, I always tease this one as being the Courtyard in downtown Cleveland. You know, it's 4 nights a week, it's pumping out points. You have business travelers staying there, but nobody is saving up all their points for a romantic weekend getaway at the downtown Cleveland Courtyard Hotel. However, contrast that to the Ritz-Carlton Grand Cayman, which is a point sink. They redeem more points than they'll ever issue. If you were to actually tokenize and distribute currency in this kind of model, the headquarters becomes a central bank, and every individual franchisee, and we're looking at this with a retail chain that is actually pizza retail outlets around the U.S. Some of them are owned collectively as groups, others are individuals. That the central business district one generates more points than the suburban one, where there's more redemption. So then you get into the ability to have wallets at the property level, not just the individual member level, and let the individual properties exchange value between themselves. And the headquarters takes simply a fee for, as the Fed, if you will, in that regard, the Federal Reserve, providing that enabling that exchange. So you actually end up creating, because of the existence or the application of blockchain technology to this, you create an entirely new asset class that never existed before. That real estate development company who owns the Ritz-Carlton in Grand Cayman has something now to sell to other hotel operators. In this particular specific example of the Courtyard in Cleveland and the Ritz-Carlton Grand Cayman, they're both owned by the same real estate developer. So now you can imagine a scenario that because you've tokenized that currency, they can choose to keep it in the family. They can see that you're coming, you're staying in Cleveland, you're staying at other hotels. It's White Lodging is the real estate development group. And White Lodging can say, when you pop up that reservation page and you're looking for your next stay, they could say, hey, if you want to redeem those points, if you redeem them here, you'll get more for your money. I'll give you a 15% bonus on your redemption because I know that you're keeping the points in my family versus having to go back through this headquarters bank that doesn't really exist. So by tokenizing the currencies, it really does enable an entirely new asset class that never existed in a franchise world before. I know that doesn't apply directly to airlines, but I would imagine there's some value in interchanging between the carriers.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sure.
Sorry, yeah, we're getting the signal for time. So we'll end on this note then, Jackie, conveniently the last slide. Where do you see the biggest shift or change in the airline industry loyalty model that this kind of technology is going to afford?
From a loyalty perspective, definitely, as I think we mentioned now throughout the presentation, is enabling customers to redeem and to earn things, miles quicker in real time, and for any product that they would like to. Because the issue that we're currently facing, and it's one of the pain points that our customers are having, is whenever you fly on an airline, it takes up to a week, maybe 2, until you receive your miles on your account. And that's when you realize, oh, now I can redeem them. But until you find really a flight or another product that you can redeem your miles for, it's a frustration level that you're going through. So I think the key aspects that we're targeting is accrual instantly your miles. Whenever you touched ground with your airplane, you should have your miles on your account and get a notification and be able to redeem them for any product that you want. I think there we still need to find a balance. Do we want customers to redeem for anything, going to the pharmacy, going to the bakery, or do we want to keep them within our airline business to redeem for any flight that they want, to redeem for seats, for extra baggage, and for those items? But we're still missing the technology behind it. And I think having blockchain in mind, considering it to enable these kind of instant exchange of information and money is something that we need. And definitely something that I see in the future for the airline industry. However, as I mentioned before, it's a very innovative product or technology behind it, and I'm not sure to what extent carriers on different levels are already ready for it, especially when it comes to the loyalty industry, because the infrastructure is heavy. Data are very important. Actually, data is the key for loyalty. There is nothing else behind it. And moving all of those things to a different technology is challenging. However, I do see this in the future. Maybe not next year, but in the next 3, 4, 5, definitely.
Thank you, Jackie. Appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thank you.